We're here at the 10th edition of the Rome-Med Mediterranean Dialogues with Dr. Nimrod Goren. He's the president and the founder of Mitvim, the Israeli Institute for Regional Foreign Policies, as well as the co-founder of Diplomeds, the Council for Mediterranean Diplomacy, and he's a senior fellow for Israeli affairs at the Middle East Institute. Great being here with you today, Nimrod. Let's kick off with some questions about the situation today in Israel and in the broader region. So a little bit more than 1 year into the war. The war hasn't ended yet. Actually, it has expanded, if we may say so. Dozens of hostages are still in the hands of Hamas, or they're not home yet. I would like to ask you first, what has been the broader impact of the war on Israeli society, on Israel in general, and how is the current situation seen 1 year into the war in Israel?
Thank you. It's a pleasure being here speaking with you. I think the major impact is still what happened on October 7th, being the most traumatic, most deadly days in Israeli history that shows so many failures in conduct that led to such a horrible event, the Hamas terror attack and the aftermath. And that really shapes the Israeli narrative until today, because as you mentioned, there are 101 hostages that are still at the hands of Hamas. There are tens of thousands of Israelis that are still evacuated from their homes in the north, in the south. There are many who are doing reserve service and are actually fighting, and people who lost so much of their loved ones, economy. So there's a lot of suffering happening within society without even speaking about the suffering on the other side. It also needs to be acknowledged what happened to the Palestinian people. So Israeli mindset is still very much in October 7th, and whatever happened since is generally seen in Israel as a justified war. Okay, so there's a strong support for the cause of war. There is quite a lot of criticism on the way the Prime Minister Netanyahu has managed the situation before October 7, since October 7, and after October 7. So this gap between supporting a war but not rallying around the leader is quite unique, because in the past, whenever there's a war, the support of the leader increases as well. Here it went the opposite manner.
So let's get to the strategy, if we can say so, of the current government, of the Prime Minister Netanyahu. Almost from the onset, the outcome of the war, if we may so, has been also linked to the political future of Prime Minister Netanyahu. So what is his endgame today? Has it changed since 1 year? What is his longer, let's say, strategy in this war?
I would first take it a bit out of Netanyahu only, because within the Israeli governing system, we have a coalition, we have a government, we have decision-making bodies. So it's not all personalized in our society and system. There are 3 goals that the Israeli government approved for the war. So officially, the goals are to make sure that Hamas doesn't govern Gaza anymore, that Hamas doesn't have the capacity to do anything like that again, and to release the hostages. And a couple of months ago, a 4th objective was added, which was to enable the return of the Israelis to the north, to the border with Lebanon, where fighting with Hezbollah has happened. So that's the official position of Israel. And whether it was achieved or not, there are different discussions within the society. Over time, it was very clear that for Netanyahu, the manner of conduct is also very much related to his own political faith. Because one of the things that happened in public opinion very shortly after October 7th and sustained over time was the lack of trust of Israelis in the current government, and the wish for early election and for a new prime minister. It doesn't mean that Israel shifts its ideology. So many people are still defining themselves within the right wing, within Netanyahu's ideology, but they want to see someone else lead that ideology, and not Netanyahu. And Netanyahu, while kind of losing on the public opinion front, has managed successfully to consolidate his cling to power within the parliament, within the Knesset, with all kind of political moves that remain or keep his coalition intact until now. So that's, I think, the gap between the military objective, the public opinion, and the political maneuvering by the Prime Minister.
So what do you expect from his trial resuming soon in some days, and from the arrest warrant that has been issued last week?
So even on the legal front, you have two different tracks. You have the domestic track, which is the corruption trial that Netanyahu is supposed to go to to testimony in early December or December 10th, the new date, which is a major event that he's trying to avoid and prevent and find ways to bypass that and push it a bit forward, because that will be an embarrassing situation for him and also a dangerous one politically wise. And then there is the international legal track, which is the ICC decision, the arrest warrants against him and also against former Minister of Defense, Yoav Gallant, who paradoxically is considered the more reasonable, or was considered when he was in government until he was fired by Netanyahu, as the good interlocutor for the US administration and the one who is more responsible, the one who is calling to end the war for hostage release. So them both are the ones with the arrest warrants, and it's still not clear what practical implication it will have. It definitely something that Israel never experienced before, that many Israelis are kind of baffled and maybe ashamed that our country is in such a situation. But in terms of practical meaning, it's still not clear. There are all kinds of assumptions. It probably won't be a good implication, but how bad it will be, we don't know, especially with the new American administration that is more aligned than the previous one with Netanyahu and is more eager to defend him and Israel's interests in the international community.
So as we speak today, the Israeli cabinet is considering the prospect of a ceasefire deal in Lebanon, a ceasefire deal that has been strongly encouraged and brokered by the United States as well. How do you assess this, and how do you think this could impact, if it could impact the war in Gaza?
Yeah, that's a very important and positive development. Until now, we spoke about the war as a war, but eventually we had at least two fronts, because we also had Yemen, we also had attacks from Iraq, the Iran militias, and from Iran itself. But the major fronts were Gaza and Lebanon, and for months they seemed to be linked to each other. So when the US envoy Amos Hochstein was doing his shuttle diplomacy, he made progress on the Lebanese front, but all the time the message was, we cannot really implement that until a ceasefire in Gaza is reached. So things were kind of stuck, because on Gaza the gaps were very, very big. That began to change over the last few months with the Israeli attacks on Hezbollah that made a lot of impact. And now we see the linkage between the fronts. The fact that diplomacy managed to reach an agreement that hopefully will be implemented and approved and will end the war, that's very big, because for months, in Israel, we didn't see how this war ends. What will be the off-ramp of them? And now we have one. And it also shows people that diplomacy can actually achieve some gains, and you should invest in that. It will bring regular life again to people on both sides of the Israel-Lebanese border. Hopefully, it will create a momentum that will enable Israel and Lebanon to gradually move to more engagement, to maybe discuss the land border between them. That's part of the plan for the long term, to return stability. There's quite a bit of shared interest between Israel and Lebanon that until now were unfulfilled. Maybe now it will create an opening for a different future.
So let's get back to what you mentioned previously, the incoming U.S. administration. Do you think a second Trump administration could be a game changer, or that would change something in the current situation in the war as well?
I think it changes perception for many actors. So I think it's not by chance that President Biden is now making the final effort to reach a deal on Lebanon, and that all parties are on board with that, because there was an interest that is also shaped by maybe messaging coming from the incoming administration. On Gaza, I don't see that change moving things in a positive direction. There is no inclination by the current Israeli coalition to go for a ceasefire like in Lebanon, in Gaza. You see Israel consolidating basically its military presence within the Gaza Strip, with some calls within the far right to even go and try to build settlement there. It's not an official position, but there are these people, and some of them are in the coalition. And President Trump, when he comes into office, I don't think he will challenge that. I think if he can get a message that the war is ended, but actually it means that Israel keeps its military within Gaza, that will be quite fine for him. We see the appointments that he has been making. These are not people who are supportive of the two-state solution or advocates of that. So on the Palestinian side, unfortunately, I don't see the new administration making progress on that. We saw what it did last time with the Trump peace plan that was very far from the traditional two-state solution plans, and even that did not go anywhere. Where you may see some progress is in Israel-Gulf relations, because the Trump administration will probably have good relations with countries in the Gulf, including Saudi Arabia, including countries that already normalized ties with Israel, And I think over time that will lead to more engagement, more cooperation, maybe below the surface or public between Israel and the Gulf states.
This year, beyond the war in Gaza, the war in Lebanon, we've seen several military missile exchanges between Israel and Iran, who's another prominent actor in the region. How do you assess the situation now? Are we done with that tit for tat, or is something going to change?
It's a new reality. It's the type of warfare that we didn't experience. People were very afraid of that happening. So in a way, when it happened and it was contained the way it was, and the way that the American coalition in the region operated, so de facto you had countries in the Arab world that are very critical of Israel during a time of war, cooperating with the US to practically defend, Israeli interests and territory. That was a very big signal about how sustainable the Israel-Arab relationship in the region is and how much potential it has if we will have a different future of peacemaking between Israelis and the Palestinians. So that was a very strong signal. Then the fact that it was somehow orchestrated through diplomatic means. So when one country made its move, it took 2, 3, 4 weeks for the other country to respond, during which there was a lot of diplomatic channels happening. Again, the power of diplomacy at play. So even at a time of war, you see the channels of communication, even if indirect, even if discreet, can help shape what operations are taking place and help limit them. Hopefully now with the ceasefire in Lebanon happening, if it actually happens, probably it has Iranian blessing, and if it's moving forward in a positive manner, it will help de-escalate the situation between Israel and Iran and prevent another round of such attacks, although we'll have to see again, coming back to Washington, what will be the new policy of the administration towards Iran. It's expected to be quite a tough one. For Israel, maybe it will mean that now we trust on the Americans to take care of the Iranian issue. We don't need to do it on our own. That's kind of maybe the Netanyahu mindset with Trump coming into the White House.
Let's get back to the region, to Israel and Palestine, to the very issue where the current situation is rooted, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Do you think the two-state solution or any solution is still the most viable prospect for an enduring relationship between the two peoples and countries? What are the prospects today of this?
I still see the two-state solution as the most feasible solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the one that will best serve the interests of both the Israeli and the Palestinian national movements. We need to acknowledge that it's becoming more and more difficult to obtain this solution, not only because of what's happening with the West Bank settlements, Palestinian leadership, but now also with what's happening in Gaza, because if Israel goes back to somehow control parts of Gaza, it takes us back 20 years ago before the Israeli disengagement from Gaza in 2005. So we are being taken back on that time and time again. But if you look into the future and the aspiration for peace, we in the region, we have no other choice. We can say this solution seems impossible or difficult, but then what is the alternative? And there is no better alternative. So people on both sides, the moderates on both sides, should find ways to first reverse the trend of taking action that block prospects for a solution. Okay? And then you slowly begin to create the conditions that could gradually lead there. You need to renew the interaction between the Israeli and Palestinian civil societies. There was a lot of peace activism going on for decades between Israelis and Palestinians in the West Bank. Those almost stopped even before the war. Okay, so after the war, there is a need to kind of revamp that and have people talk to each other again and meet each other. Now, it's also a question of which regional framework you put the conflict through. So when you take Israelis and Palestinians and enable that dialogue or that conversation about the conflict, let's say within a Mediterranean framework, like what ROMED is doing, what ISP is doing, that brings a lot of new opportunities. In the Mediterranean, you have the Union for the Mediterranean, in which Israel and Palestine as a state, are both members on equal footing. The same goes for the East Med Gaz Forum. You don't have that in the Middle East conflict. So when you look at the conflict through a different regional lens, all of a sudden you see some new opportunities emerging. And I think that's where we should go. We should look at the conflict from a regional framework that enables a bit of a softer conversation between the sides with more shared interests at play. And through that, gradually work, but to make real progress towards peace, We need to go through leadership change. We need leaders who are committed, legitimized, moderate, and at least on the Israeli side, it means a different type of coalition than the one we have now.
Thank you very much, Nimrod Goren. That'll be it for today's interview.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.